We're going to talk about arthropods. These are very numerous. Some scientists have estimated that there are 200 million arthropods alive for every human. So if you take the billions of humans on the planet and you multiply every person by 200 million, that's how many arthropods there are on the planet. That's bananas. About 84% of all known animal species are in this phylum, the phylum Arthropoda. That means that if you are ever in a contest where somebody says, hey, I've got an animal, guess what phylum it is? You should go with arthropods because 84% of the time you're going to be right. They are found in every habitat on Earth. That means they are terrestrial, they're found on land. They are aquatic, and because they are aquatic, that means they are both marine, meaning they're found in saltwater, oceanic seas, and freshwater ecosystems. So you name it, you're going to find an arthropod there. And they do all the feeding modes. There are carnivores, there are herbivores, there are scavengers, there are detritivores, there are deposit feeders, all of them. You name a feeding mode, there is an arthropod that does it. So they're very, very diverse. Now, I want to be really clear that when I say that, I don't mean, well, there probably is one, but what I'm not saying is that if you grab an arthropod, that it could eat meat, it could eat plants, it could da-da-da-da-da. I'm not saying that one arthropod can do all the feeding modes. I'm saying that in all of the arthropods that exist out there, some of them are carnivores, some of them are herbivores, some of them are deposit feeders. There's some that do each thing. Not that there's like, each one of them can be like, ooh, I'll eat whatever I want, however I want. Like that's not how it works. Okay, so whoa, this is a lot. There's a lot going on here. There's, you can see this whole like crazy variety that's here. Some of these you're gonna recognize, some of these you don't. There's a bunch of names for different parts on here. You don't need to worry about that. But one thing you can see is this word subphylum. And we haven't really talked about a subphylum before. So we've talked about a domain. I'm going to pause periodically through here for you to stop and quiz yourself. So ask yourself, what domain are arthropods going to belong to? Hopefully you said eukarya. Now ask yourself, what kingdom are arthropods going to belong to? Hopefully you said Animalia. And the next would be phylum. And of course, arthropods are what we're talking about here. So that's the phylum. So now, as we've learned, we go domain, kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. But scientists have discovered that taxonomy is a little bit more complicated than that. And so in certain categories, they put in these subs. So within the phylum of Arthropoda, we have subphyla. Remember, phyla is plural and phylum is singular. So we have subphyla. So one of them is called Uniramia. One of them is called crustaceans. One of them is called trilobites. And one of them is called chelicerates. Look at that word and practice saying it. It's chelicerates. Say it again. Chelicerates. Practice saying it, chelicerates, because you know I'm going to make you say it in class. So chelicerates is that word, or chelicerata if you want to go with the Latin. And then within each of these subphyla, those then, remember, are going to branch out into different classes, orders, genus, species. I left family out of this, so kingdom, phylum, subphylum, class, order, family, genus, species. Whoopsie doopsie, little PowerPoint problem. Okay, so if we look at it evolutionarily, if we were going to look back, we could look at this common ancestor back here. This is somebody who doesn't exist anymore. And then those populations broke off and we got different kinds of evolution. So some of them had jaws and some of them had fangs or pinchers. And so we've got chelicerata that come off over here. And then we've got our trilobites over here, and those are extinct. our crustaceans that came off this way, and our Uniramia that came off this way. And so then our Uniramia break off into these classes: Diplopoda, Chilopoda, Insecta. We've got our crustacea that break off into the class Malacostraca, that then breaks off into the orders Decapoda and Isopoda. And then we have our chelicerates that are going to break off into, we have class arachnids over here, which has the 3 orders. And then we have these other orders over here of our chelicerata with our horseshoe crabs and our sea spiders. So it gets kind of complicated the more we branch off, but it's okay. We'll get through it. All right, so some major characteristics of arthropods. So what makes an arthropod, or what are sort of these main things? Well, the first thing is we've got bilateral symmetry. And remember, that means that we could draw a line down the middle, we could flip it, fold it in half, and we would have mirror images. So our arthropods are going to have bilateral symmetry. The thing that makes an arthropod is the jointed appendages. That's what arthropod means. Arthro means jointed. Pod refers to a limb or a leg. So an arthropod has a jointed limb or a jointed leg. So no matter what kind of arthropod you're looking at, it has appendages with a joint in it. So all of these little guys have jointed appendages. Every one of those subphyla, every one of those classes and orders, jointed appendages. That's the main thing that makes an arthropod an arthropod. There's also going to be segmentation. So they're going to have segmented bodies. And depending on what kind of arthropod it is, depending on what subphylum, class, and order it's in, you're going to have a different kind of segmentation. So a centipede has a head, a body, and a tail. Whereas an insect is going to have a head, a thorax, and an abdomen. And then a crayfish is going to have something called a cephalothorax. If you think about it, you should be able to break that down because you know what cephalo means. Cephalo means head. And so if you look at the cephalothorax on that crayfish, you can see that the head and the thorax are like combined. So instead of being like an insect with a head and a thorax that are separate from each other, it has a cephalothorax, which is a head and thorax together. And then again, they've got an abdomen that's separate. So there's going to be different segments depending on what kind of arthropod it is that you're looking at, but they all have segmented bodies. So we have jointed appendages and we have segmented bodies. They're going to have an exoskeleton, which is mostly made of this complex carbohydrate that's called chitin. There is also some calcium carbonate sprinkled in there for a little extra oomph. And then because it's so hard, it's like a hard shell, in order for them to grow, arthropods are going to have to molt. So we've seen this happen all over the place with the cicadas all over our area. But basically they just do this like crazy alien thing where they bust out of their shell. They come out. When they first come out, they're really soft and squishy and they're very vulnerable. And then over a few minutes or hours, that outer shell, that new baby exoskeleton kind of hardens up. And then they get a nice protective exoskeleton again. And then they leave that other shell behind. And then we come along and find it later and go, ew, gross. All right, so some other characteristics of arthropods, just walking through sort of some of the systems. They have complex muscle systems. So they've got muscles that are attached to their exoskeleton, and then there's 2 different kinds of muscles. So striated, if you look at this muscle, it looks like it's got stripes. That's what striated means. Striated means it has stripes. So there's specific types of muscle now in our arthropod. There's a type of muscle that's good for rapid action, like moving the legs. But then there's a different kind of muscle, smooth muscle. So if you look at this, it looks like maybe if you like rubbed your finger along this would be really smooth to the touch. So smooth muscle is for visceral organs. That means like the stomach. So the viscera are the guts. They're the internal organs. So you have smooth muscle there, and then you have striated muscle for the legs and for movement. So now we're getting into complex specific types of muscles, not just kind of generic do what we need to do muscles, but like everybody's got its own purpose and everybody's structure matches up with its function, so that in one spot we've got a really good kind of muscle for jumping or swimming. In another spot we've got a really good type of muscle for digestion. Arthropods are coelomates. That means they have an internal body cavity. And if you look at just the inside of this guy, you can see that we've got all of these systems happening in here. We've got hearts, we've got a reproductive system, we've got breathing, respiratory system. We'll talk more about that later. We've got a stomach and a digestive system. So there's definitely a body cavity. We have a true body cavity inside our arthropods. Arthropods have an open circulatory system. So no matter which of these arthropods you look at, you can see that they have a dorsal heart and arteries. They have a dorsal heart. So all of them, if you look at the dorsal side, remember the dorsal side is like their back, okay? All of them have their heart on the dorsal side of their body. And then they have arteries, but they're not true arteries because they're not closed off tubes. They're open tubes. And so most of their body cavity is actually something called a hemocoel. Again, listen to me say the word hemocoel while you look at the word hemocoel and practice saying it a few times because you're going to have to be able to say it. So hemocoel, like coelom, is where you're going to find the hemolymph. And remember, hemolymph is that weird blood lymph fluid, that stuff that's not quite blood. It's that weird bloody lymphy fluid because our arteries aren't closed off arteries. So everything's going to come out and then go back in and come out and go back in. And so it's sort of a whole mixed up mishmash of our lymph and our blood. But the hemocoel is going to be the location, the coelom, the body part, that has the hemolymph in it, okay? But they have an open circulatory system. And remember that the reason they can have an open circulatory system, if you think about the size of arthropods, there are very few very large arthropods. If you want to be really big, you need a closed circulatory system. If you're okay with staying small, then you're okay with an open circulatory system. They have a complete digestive system. That means they have a mouth, goes all the way through to an anus. So they've got a foregut, a midgut, and a hindgut. They've got these different parts. So we go from a mouth to an anus. We've got a complete digestive system. And then they've got mouth parts that are modified appendages, and depending on what shape they are, they do different things. So remember, way back early on, I told you that arthropods will do all the different feeding types. And depending on what type of arthropod it is, it's going to have a different type of mouth part. And so the mouth part it has is going to be perfect for whatever it is it eats. So if you're an arthropod born with a certain kind with little pinchers, then you're going to be able to go catch prey and you're going to eat that. If you're an arthropod with a long tube, then you're going to be a fluid feeder so that you can suck that fluid up and eat that fluid. So whatever your appendages are on your mouth, that's going to impact what it is you can eat. Excretory system, this is kind of cool. So there are these tubules in terrestrial arthropods. So the ones that live on land have these tubules that are going to help carry waste out. So you can look at the diagram and you can see they're called Malpighian tubules. Okay, so there are these tubules that are going to help them take the waste out. And then in aquatic arthropods, there are these things called green glands. And so green glands help them to take care of waste products. So if you are a seafood eater, if you like to eat lobster, if you like to eat crayfish, you're going to see that like gross green stuff in there. And that is part of the excretory system. It's not poop, but it is stuff that you don't want to have. And they are glands that help get rid of the waste products for the arthropod. Nervous system. Oh, arthropods have a great nervous system. So let's work through this. They have an anterior dorsal brain. So anterior, remember, means toward the head, and dorsal means toward the back. So there's a brain that's toward the head, and then it's up on the back. Okay, so it's back here. So if you're looking at an arthropod, you can find its brain by going anterior toward the head, and then toward the back, it's dorsal, just like the heart was dorsal also. And then there's a double nerve chain. So there's nerves that come down the back. And then they have highly developed sensory organs. So they have, if you think about the eyes of a fly and all of the many different facets in the eyes of a fly, if you think about just all of the ways that arthropods can sense movement in water, they're crazy perceptive, and this is going to help them for stalking their prey, for hunting, for escaping predators. If you're able to catch a fly with your hand, that fly was probably sick and about to die. A healthy fly has a reaction time that is above and beyond anything you could ever accomplish anything with. And that's because they have a nervous system that is so complex, that is so good, that is so just on point for keeping them safe. Reproduction. Most arthropods are dioecious. So most arthropods are reproducing sexually, and there are males and females of the species. There are some that are hermaphroditic, but most of them are dioecious. And usually we're talking about internal fertilization. So overall, if you're gambling, you go dioecious, sexual, internal fertilization, but remembering that some of them are hermaphrodites. And this, believe it or not, is how a dragonfly and a damselfly will mate. I will not walk you through the process. You can look it up if you'd like to. Respiration. So respiration is going to happen in lots of different ways in arthropods. One way it's going to happen is through the body surface. So we've talked about diffusion through the body surface for lots and lots of different phyla that we've talked about this semester. But respiration through the body surface, remember, only works if you're really small. Because if you're not small, you just can't get enough oxygen into your body. You can't get enough waste products out. So little things like this branchiopod, these are little freshwater dudes. They're going to be able to be okay with respiring through the body surface, but not everybody is. Marine and freshwater arthropods are going to use gills. So real life gills, like you would see them just like with the naked eye. These are the gills in a crayfish. This is what you would see. But if you were to look up close, now this is not a crayfish gill. This is another arthropod gill. But if you were to look up close under a microscope, this is what a gill would look like. So if you were to look at this, which looks just kind of fleshy here, but you were to look at it under a microscope, it would look like this. And the thing that I really, really hope you're noticing here is that it has lots and lots of surface area, because lots of surface area gives us lots of space for the exchange of gases, for oxygen in, carbon dioxide out. The more surface area we have, the more efficient we are at gas exchange. And so not only do we have lots of surface area in this one gill, but then look at how many gills there are here and how much there is compared to the rest of the body that's there for gas exchange. Another thing you might see, insects will have these things called spiracles and trachea. So the spiracles and the trachea work together. Spiracles are little small openings that go to the outside, and tracheae are tubes that take air to the other parts of the body. So they're like little straws, I guess. And so the spiracle is just the whole of the straw, and the trachea are the tubes that take the air there. So if you look at this diagram, you can see little spiracles along the abdomen of this insect, and then you can see the trachea. The tracheae are these little tubes that are then going to go over to the muscle, and they're going to drop off the oxygen to the muscle tissue and pick up the carbon dioxide from the muscle tissue, and then kind of shoot the carbon dioxide out the other end, out through the spiracle. So it's the spiracle and tracheae are just like a straw Spherical is the hole, trachea is the actual body of the straw. They're going to bring oxygen in, take carbon dioxide out. And then the last version of respiration that we're going to look at, and spiders have these, are called book lungs. If you look at it, it makes sense. Book lungs are like, it's like the pages of a book. It works like a lung because these are for terrestrial arthropods. You're going to see book lungs in terrestrial arthropods. Now, when you look at this picture of this book lung, what does that look a lot like? What does that remind you of? Hopefully you said it looks like a gill. And hopefully the reason you said it looks like a gill is because it has lots of surface area. And that lots of surface area is going to do the same thing in the arachnids that it's going to do for the aquatic arthropods, where you've got this huge amount of surface area, and then that's going to allow the exchange of oxygen and carbon dioxide. So if we're on land, we might have book lungs, or we might have sphericals and trachea. If we're in the water, we're going to have gills. And then if we're teeny tiny, we might be able to just use our body surfaces. All right, but why are there so many arthropods? Why am I personally responsible for 200 million arthropods on this planet? Like, why? Why are there so many? Well, there's a bunch of reasons. One, they just have this fantastic exoskeleton. It's so good for protecting them. It's so good for keeping them safe. It's so good for giving them the structure they need to be able to do what they need to do. Their segmentation and their appendages make them really, really versatile. So having that variety, am I going to have one body part? Am I going to have a head, body, and tail? Or am I going to have a cephalothorax and an abdomen? Or am I going to have a head, thorax, abdomen? There's so many pieces that it's almost like Legos. Like you can put the Legos together in so many different ways. You can get such a wide variety. And of course, the more variety we have, the better off we are evolutionarily speaking. We've got really efficient respiratory systems, again, a variety of respiratory systems that are all really well adapted to however it is we need to live our lives, wherever we're going to be. If we're going to be in the water, if we're going to be on land, if we're going to be small, if we're going to be big. Really awesome sensory organs. I talked about that with their brains, with their anterior dorsal brain. Really good at just perceiving everything that's going on around them and knowing so they can keep themselves safe, keep themselves alive, but also go find food and stalk whatever prey they need to. And then they've just got complex behaviors. They're not just floating around like our cnidarians are. They're not just sessile sitting there waiting for stuff to come by. They're able to go out and do. They're go-getters. They can go do what they need to do. They can go find what they need to find. And they're able to have these complex behaviors that just let them do things that other phyla we've looked at before just haven't allowed them to do. And then the last thing is just, it's so sneaky cool. Oops, that's the wrong slide. Is this idea of metamorphosis. So metamorphosis, you guys have all learned when you were in kindergarten, you probably had a little caterpillar that then you fed and you had it develop into a butterfly, and then you went and set it free. Or maybe it was tragic and it died, because sometimes kindergarten teachers have that happen to them too. But you guys know that you're going to have an adult that's going to lay some eggs. The eggs are going to get laid. They're going to get nutrition on this leaf. They're going to grow. They're going to be bigger. They're going to become larvae. The larva is going to be the caterpillar or the worm-like thing that's going to go get its food from wherever it gets its food. It's going to go into a pupa where it's going to be doing its thing inside of its chrysalis. It's going to make its changes inside, and it's going to come out as an adult. But here's the deal. Metamorphosis reduces competition, because if everybody was born a butterfly and everybody lived their entire lives as butterflies, then everybody would be competing for the same food source, and everybody would be trying to live in the same places, because everybody would be in that butterfly state. But if you take it to another stage of eggs, where the eggs eat something different, they get their nutrition differently from the butterflies, Well, now somebody can be an egg and somebody can be a butterfly, and there's twice as much food because you're getting food from two different places and you're living in two different places. Factor in larvae as a stage. Now the larvae are doing something different. So now you've got 3 times as much food and 3 times as much space to live because everybody's living in a different spot and everybody's eating something different. So even though we're only talking about one species, we've now divvied stuff up so that we have 3 times as much space to live, 3 times as much food available to us. So that's one of the reasons we have so many different arthropods out there in the world. So those are some basics about just plain old arthropods in general. As we move on, we're going to go back to the beginning of this presentation and we're going to look at some of those different categories, some of those subphyla, and some of the classes and orders and kind of learn more about those. All right, hope this helped.